Hey, as we start talking about children's ministry, probably one of the most important areas for us to focus on is what God's heart for children is. Um, when Jesus came to earth, he totally changed people's perspective on ministry to children. And we want to talk about that. We want that heart to be our heart. Sometimes when we talk about God's heart for children, we use the example of a three-stone fire. When we travel around the world, we often see in many different cultures that same process of seeing men or women build a fire in order to cook. And that cooking process, and we in children's ministry kind of look at that as making disciples. It's everything we put in and add to a child's life in the process of discipling them so that we produce followers of Christ. But there are there's three important parts of this process, not only the discipleship, but the stones are really important. And in a little bit, we're going to talk about that, the importance of the teacher, the three parts of a teacher that are really important in this process of making disciples. But the center of that has got to be God's heart for children. It's got to be that passion that burns in us as teachers. Not just because we like kids or because we do well with them. And so that kind of attracts us to this ministry. But we've got to understand this is a call from God to make disciples. And we've got to have his understanding in our heart. We've got to have his passion burning in us. And Jesus really changed the way people looked at children. And I want us to kind of look at that together as you look at Matthew 18. It's one of the most important passages for those of us in children's ministry that helps us to understand the importance of ministry to kids. You'll remember at the beginning of this, some of the disciples were kind of arguing among themselves about who was the greatest in the kingdom of God. And I can imagine they were going back and forth, remembering who walked on water, who got to put their head on Jesus' shoulder, who was the first one to have the revelation about Jesus being the Christ. And they're just kind of wondering, who is it that's really most important here? And as they're kind of debating and pushing each other aside a little bit, they end up going to Jesus and saying, hey, which one of us is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus kind of looks at them a bit puzzled and almost like, really, this is what you want to talk about? Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? So he decides to give them an example, and he kind of parts the disciples a bit, and he sees a child standing just over there. And he takes that little one by the hand and brings him into the circle of these disciples standing all around. And you can just imagine this little one kind of looking up like, what am I doing here? Who are all these men? And then Jesus says, I tell you the truth. And whenever Jesus says that, he's saying, this is really important. You got to pay attention to this. I tell you the truth. Unless you, disciples, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, most of our lives we spend trying not to be like children. People tell us all the time, come on, grow up. You're acting like a baby. Don't be so childish. And so we spend so much time trying to not be like children that Jesus turns it around and says, dudes, unless you change and become like a child, you're never even going to get into the kingdom of heaven, let alone be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So these disciples, I can imagine stuff going through their head, like, what is he talking about? Why do we have to go backwards? Why do we have to undo what we've been trying to learn all along? And then he says this, therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So now he's saying being like a child is actually the greatest in the kingdom of God. And what you guys need to do is humble yourself to be like a child. Then we can talk about greatness in the kingdom of heaven. See, Jesus was changing the way people thought about children. I've been to countries where people don't even recognize kids. I remember going to one country in Africa asking pastors at this pastors conference, just saying to them, do you do ministry to children in your churches? And they kind of looked at each other and kind of admitted, no, we don't. We just focus on the adults. And when I pressed them to, like, why? They began to discuss together, and really they came up with three big reasons. One, they said, we don't think kids are smart enough to understand spiritual things. We don't think they get it. They're too little, too young. Now, they're old enough to take care of the family business. They're old enough to be responsible to take the flocks out and watch over them. They're old enough to help in the house and learn skills in dad's trade. They're able to do all those things, but spiritual things, we think they can't understand it. And we know that's not true, but that was the excuse they gave. The second thing they said is, a lot of the kids are not going to survive until they're adults. Death rate was pretty high. So they said, we're just going to wait and see who survives, and then we'll deal with them as adults. They've totally discounted the value of a child and investing in them early. The third thing they said is kids don't bring money into the house, into the church. Instead, they cost us money. It's expensive to do children's ministry. It's a lot of work. It's hard. It doesn't seem financially profitable for us. And really, we know that unless you reach that generation while they're children, you may lose them as adults by the time they get to be adults, and then there is no profit in the church at all. So they were using some really faulty understanding, which is pretty common in lots of places around the world. And Jesus was addressing that even with the disciples, saying, you got to change the way you look at greatness, the way you look at success, the way you look at importance in the kingdom of heaven. Humble yourself, become like a child, and you can get into the kingdom of heaven. He goes on to say, and whoever welcomes one of these little ones, to embrace them, welcome them, bring them into the circle instead of keeping them out. Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. That was a pretty big deal. We haven't even been looking at these kids. We haven't even been paying attention to them. And now Jesus says, if you welcome them, you welcome me. That's pretty amazing. And then he goes on way stronger than that. And then he says, whoever causes any one of these little ones to stumble, or to sin, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and they be drowned in the depths of the sea. He says, don't do anything to hurt them, offend them. Be careful. And there are a lot of cultures around the world that really don't even think about what they're doing to children in the way they neglect them or abuse them or use them, hurt them. They're free with their anger and their emotions with them, and they just think they'll bounce back. And Jesus is saying, don't do anything like that. Don't hurt one of these little ones. Jesus was lifting up the important, because they would never do that to someone important in the community. They would never treat someone like that the way they treat children. And Jesus is saying, don't do that. In fact, Jesus goes on to say, don't even look down on them. I've talked to pastors in other around the world who would say, you know what, I really don't even notice kids when they're coming to church. I greet the parents and I just totally look down on kids and discount them. And if they cry in the service, I want them removed. If they're running around, we want to get it stopped and get them out of here. There's even a church we've heard of in the U.S. That has on the door to the auditorium that suggests that children not come into the auditorium. Please keep them away because they're disruption. Jesus is saying, don't even look down on them. In verse 10, it says, for I tell you that they have an angel in heaven looking into the face of my Father in heaven. So he's saying, look, don't look down on these guys, because they have an angel who's right there in the presence of God, looking right into God's face, and will do anything that God asks. And if that child is being offended or hurt or neglected, God can dispatch an angel to take care of it. He's saying these guys, these are important to God. These children are important. And then probably one of the most famous parables that Jesus told, he's actually telling it in the context of children. Suppose a shepherd had 100 sheep, and as he was counting them all off, one of them is lost. What does that shepherd do? Got 99, that one was trouble anyway, we'll forget him. No, it says he leaves the 99 and he goes to find the one. How far did he go? As far as he needed to. How long did it take? Just till dinner time, and then I got to get back and get some dinner. No, he went as far as he needed to go, as long as it took. He did anything he could. That was his one mission, to find that lost sheep. And then it says, and then when he found them, there was huge rejoicing. Because it says, your Father in heaven doesn't want even one of these little ones to be lost. That's God's heart and passion for kids. Now, when Jesus told that parable, he was talking about 1% of the population that was lost. What is it for your community? What is it for our community here? For us, I live in kind of the Seattle metro area, and in our neck of the woods, there are about 400,000 kids. Now, about 35,000 of them are churched. 35,000 seems like a huge number. 35,000 kids know Jesus and if learning to follow him. They're being discipled in local churches, but there are 365,000 kids in our area who are not following Christ, who don't know about him. What would Jesus say to us? How would he tell that parable to us? Yeah, he'd say, suppose a shepherd had 100 sheep, and 90 of them are lost. What would that shepherd be told to do? You got to leave everything you have and go and rescue those 90. See, that's the percentage it is for us. And what God may be asking us to do is not just take care of the 10%, and not just hope that those other 90 will just find their way into our little church or our little sheep pen. But he's saying we got to go out there. We got to go find them. We got to rescue them. Because that's God's heart for children. He doesn't want even one of them to be lost. Now, did the disciples learn this lesson? Just a chapter later. It says that moms were getting ready to bring their children to see Jesus. You could just see them straightening out their clothes and getting all excited, fixing their hair and making sure they were all ready and getting off the smudges. And the kids were all excited they were going to go see Jesus. And so they all head out and they're walking toward Jesus. And the first one they meet is the disciples, who say, wait a second, you can't come in here. Jesus is doing something really important. He's talking to adults. And you guys are kids. No kids allowed. Jesus heard what was happening, and it says he was indignant. He was angry. He stopped that important thing that he was doing. He stopped it and said, you let those children come to me. Don't do anything to prevent them from coming to me. We have to look at our ministries. We have to look at our mission in life and say, are we doing anything that would prevent children from coming to know him? And in fact, are we doing the opposite? Are we doing everything we can to welcome them in his name, to respect them and value them, not looking down on them, but treating them as someone that God, our Father in heaven, doesn't want to perish? We need to rescue them, look for them. Are we being that kind of welcome and drawing force in their lives? And then it says Jesus took those little kids who came then running to him. Once he gave the signal, they came running to him and surrounded him, and with laughter and some climbing on him. And it says he took them in his arms and he put his hands on them and he blessed them. That's exactly what we need to do as we are teaching, as we are working with kids, as we are parenting them, as we welcome them, respect them, protect them, care for them, value them, that we sort of in the place of Jesus receive them, bless them, pray for them. That's God's heart for kids. That's why we do what we do, because he loves them so much. We love them too. So I hope that helps inspire you a little bit as we talk about that fire in the middle of us that really energizes us, inspires us, motivates us to reach kids. Let's do it together. Let's reach kids for him.